Commander Park Dae-ho stood in the middle of the huge crystal hall where the Galactic Council met every month to decide the fate of millions of worlds across the galaxy. His dark eyes looked at the rows of alien beings who were now shouting and pointing their claws, tentacles, and other strange body parts at him. The noise was so loud that the translation machines were having trouble keeping up with all the angry voices. Park Dae-ho had been coming to this place for 30 long years. He had seen wars start and end in this very room. He had watched as different alien species made peace deals and trade agreements. He had even helped write the laws that were supposed to keep everyone safe and happy across the galaxy. But today was different. Today felt like the end of everything he had worked forth. Valkyrie were the loudest as usual. Their leader, Prime Speaker Velthora, stood up on her 6 legs and waved her 4 arms in the air while she spoke. Her voice sounded like grinding metal when she used the human language through her translator device. She was angry about the new genetic purity protocols that the Council had voted on last week. These new rules said that humans could only have children if the Council approved. At first, they also said that human families could not settle on more than 50 worlds at a time. The worst part was that humans would have to serve as soldiers for any alien species that asked for help, but they would not get to vote on whether those wars were right or wrong. Park Dae-ho remembered when he first came to this place as a young officer. He had been so excited to represent Earth and all of humanity. He thought that working together with other species would make the galaxy a better place for everyone. He had spent years learning alien languages and customs. He had made friends with beings from worlds he could barely pronounce the names of, but things had changed over the years. At first, the aliens had welcomed human help. They needed human soldiers because humans were better at fighting than most other species. They needed human engineers because humans could fix almost anything. They needed human doctors because humans were very good at healing different types of alien bodies. The problem was that as humans became more useful, they also became more feared. The Aquarian Federation was scared that humans would take over their underwater cities. The crystalline entities worried that humans would steal their advanced technology. The ethereal collective thought that humans were too violent and unpredictable to be trusted with important decisions. Captain Lee So-young watched from the observation deck above the main floor. She had served under Park Dae-ho for 10 years, and she knew him better than anyone else in the human delegation. She could see that he was trying very hard to stay calm, even though the aliens were being very rude and unfairly. So-young had grown up on one of the border worlds where human families lived alongside alien neighbors. She had seen how humans and aliens could work together when they respected each other. But she had also seen what happened when aliens decided that humans were too dangerous to be treated as equals. The insectoid hive mind started buzzing their disapproval in a sound that made everyone in the room feel uncomfortable. Their thousands of compound eyes all turned toward Park Dae-ho. At the same time, the hive mind spoke as one voice through their queen speaker, who was almost as tall as 2 humans standing on each other's shoulders. They complained that humans were expanding into space territories that had been reserved for other species. They said that humans were breeding too fast and would soon outnumber all other intelligent life in the galaxy. They demanded that Earth agree to limit human population growth and stop building new colonies on empty worlds. Park Dae-ho had heard all of these complaints before. The truth was that humans were good at surviving in places where other species could not live. They could breathe different types of air, adapt to different gravity levels, and eat foods that would poison most aliens. This made them very useful, but it also made other species jealous and worried. The worst betrayal came from the Aquarian Federation. They had been humanity's closest allies for over a century. Human children had learned to swim in Aquarian schools. Aquarian youth had studied human art and music in Earth universities. When the border wars started 20 years ago, human soldiers had died protecting Aquarian worlds from raiders and pirates. But now the Aquarian ambassador stood up with his blue skin shimmering under the crystal hall's lights. He spoke in his people's musical language that sounded like water flowing over rocks. The translator repeated his words in flat mechanical tones. He said that the Aquarian people could no longer support human expansion into the galaxy. He claimed that humans were too aggressive and warlike to be good neighbors. He voted in favor of the genetic purity protocols even though he knew it would hurt the human families who had lived peacefully on Aquarian worlds for generations. Park Dae-ho felt something break inside his chest when he heard those words. These were the people he had bled for, fought for, and almost died for on 17 different battlefields. They were throwing away decades of friendship because they were afraid of human success. The debate went on for hours. Representatives from hundreds of different species took turns explaining why humans needed to be controlled, limited, and restricted. Each speaker tried to sound reasonable and fair, but their words all meant the same thing: humans were too good at everything, and that made everyone else uncomfortable. Finally, Prime Speaker Velthera called for silence. The great hall became quiet enough to hear the hum of the translation machines. She looked directly at Park Dae-ho and spoke in her grinding metal voice. She told him that the Galactic Council had made its decision. The genetic purity protocols would become law in 30 days. Humans would have to accept the new restrictions or face economic sanctions and military action against Earth. Park Dae-ho stood up slowly. His human uniform looked plain and simple compared to the elaborate robes and armor worn by the alien delegates, but there was something in his posture that made the entire hall pay attention. He walked to the speaking platform in the center of the room. His voice was calm and clear when he began to speak. He did not shout or wave his arms like the alien speakers had done. He simply told the truth. He reminded them that humans had shared their medical technology freely with species across the galaxy. Human doctors had saved billions of alien lives from diseases that had plagued their worlds for centuries. He talked about the wars that human soldiers had fought to protect alien colonies from raiders, pirates, and hostile empires. He explained how human engineers had built the trade routes that connected distant worlds and made the galaxy rich and prosperous. He described the human teachers who had helped alien children learn about art, music, and literature from dozens of different cultures, but most importantly, he told them about the sacrifices that humans had made, believing that they were part of a galactic family. He spoke the names of human soldiers who had died protecting alien worlds. He mentioned the human scientists who had spent their lives developing technologies that other species could use for free. When he finished speaking, Park Dae-ho looked around the hall one last time at the faces of beings he had once considered friends. Then he delivered the words that would change the galaxy forever. He announced that humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council immediately. All human soldiers would return to Earth space within 6 months. All human engineers would stop maintaining alien infrastructure. All human doctors, teachers, and scientists would end their service to alien worlds. The hall erupted in chaos again, but this time it was different. The aliens were not just angry now, they were scared. They were realizing what they had just lost. Park Dae-ho walked out of the crystal hall with his boots echoing in the sudden silence that followed his announcement. Behind him, Captain Lee So-young smiled as she watched the alien delegates panic. The real test was about to begin. Captain Kim Min-soo stared at the communication screen in his ship command center. The message from Earth Command was clear and simple: all human forces must return to Earth space immediately. No exceptions, no delays. The Great Recall had begun. Kim Min-soo had been protecting the vegan star system for almost 8 years. His fleet of 17 ships had kept the blue-skinned vegans safe from pirates, raiders, and the terrible Crimson Fleet that attacked merchant ships throughout this part of the galaxy. The vegans had always seemed grateful for human protection. They gave his crew shore leave on their beautiful crystal cities. They traded their rare metals for human technology, but when the Galactic Council voted on the genetic purity protocols, the vegans had supported the restrictions on humanity. They claimed that humans were expanding too quickly and needed to be controlled. They said it was for the good of galactic peace, even though human soldiers were dying to protect vegan worlds. The vegans still voted to limit human freedom. Lieutenant Choi Hai-jin turned from her communication station. Her face looked worried as she reported the latest messages from the vegan government. The vegan High Chancellor wanted an emergency meeting with Captain Kim Min-soo. The Chancellor was offering to change the vegan vote in the Galactic Council if the human fleet would stay and continue protecting their worlds. Kim Min-soo almost laughed at the desperate offer now that the vegans realized they would be defenseless without human protection. They suddenly wanted to be friends again, but it was too late for that. The decision had been made on Earth. All humans were coming home. The tactical display showed red warning symbols at the edge of the star system. Scout ships from the notorious Crimson Fleet had been detected hiding behind asteroids and small moons. They were waiting for the human fleet to leave so they could attack the now defenseless vegan worlds. The Crimson Fleet was known for enslaving entire populations and selling them to the highest bidder. Kim Min-soo could imagine what would happen to the vegan families after his ships left. The crystal cities would be burned. The blue-skinned children would be taken as slaves. The beautiful underwater gardens that the vegans were so proud of would be destroyed. But the vegans had made their choice when they voted against humanity. Similar scenes were happening all across the galaxy. Human commanders were receiving the same orders and facing the same desperate pleas from alien governments that had betrayed them. The Andromedans, who had always claimed that human military tactics were too primitive and chaotic, suddenly found their perfect mathematical defense systems useless against unpredictable pirate attacks. The ethereal collective discovered that their powerful telepathic abilities meant nothing against enemies who simply did not care about mental influence. Their beautiful floating cities were easy targets for raiders who could not be controlled by psychic powers. On the industrial world of Kepler 442b, Chief Engineer Yoon Tae-won was overseeing the dismantling of the massive weapons factories that humans had built over the past 50 years. The local Kepleroids had demanded that humans share all their manufacturing secrets, while refusing to allow human families to settle permanently on their world. They wanted human technology, but they did not want human neighbors now. The Kepleroids watched in growing horror as humanity packed up centuries of infrastructure. The automated defense systems were being shut down. The orbital weapons platforms were being moved to cargo ships, the advanced shield generators that protected their cities from asteroid impacts were being carefully disassembled and loaded onto human transport vessels. The Kepleroid Minister of Trade ran after Yoon Tae-won as he supervised the loading of the last factory equipment. The minister was a tall, insect-like creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that showed his panic clearly. He kept offering bigger and bigger bribes to make the humans stay first. He offered rare crystals, then he offered exclusive mining rights to entire asteroids, then he offered to make humans equal citizens with full voting rights on Kepleroid worlds. But Yoon Tae-won did not even look up from his checklist. The orders from Earth were clear: take everything that humans had built and leave nothing behind. The minister finally screamed that the Razorclaw horde would invade within months without human defenses. The Razorclaws were savage reptilian warriors who conquered worlds just for the fun of fighting. They turned captured cities into fighting arenas where prisoners had to battle wild beasts for the entertainment of Razorclaw crowds. Yoon Tae-won finally looked at the desperate minister. His voice was calm and cold when he spoke. He told the Kepleroid that they should have thought about the Razorclaw threat before voting to restrict human rights in the Galactic Council. The Great Exodus continued across hundreds of star systems. Every human soldier, engineer, doctor, teacher, and scientist began the long journey back to Earth. Behind them they left empty military bases, silent factories, abandoned hospitals, and increasingly desperate alien civilizations. Dr. Song Hyo-jin had been running the medical center on New Atlantis for 12 years. She had trained dozens of Aquarian doctors in human surgical techniques. She had developed new treatments for diseases that affected multiple alien species. Her hospital had saved thousands of lives from beings across the galaxy, but the Aquarians had voted for the genetic purity protocols despite decades of human medical assistance. Now, as Dr. Song packed her equipment and closed down the medical center, sick Aquarians were already dying without human doctors to treat them. The Aquarian Medical Council sent representatives to beg Dr. Song to stay. They offered her anything she wanted: money, land, titles, even honorary citizenship in the Aquarian Federation, but she had already received her orders from Earth. All human medical personnel were to return home immediately. Lieutenant Park Soo-bin was monitoring space traffic from the orbital station above New Atlantis. She watched as hundreds of human ships lifted off from the planet's surface, carrying doctors, nurses, medical technicians, and all their equipment. The Aquarians could only watch helplessly as their best hospital shut down forever. The Pattern repeated on world after world. Humans had built the infrastructure that kept galactic civilization running. They had provided the military protection that kept hostile forces at bay. They had shared their knowledge freely with species that now seemed ungrateful and short-sighted. Captain Quan the Jin commanded one of the transport fleets carrying human families away from the border worlds. She had grown up on these frontier planets where humans and aliens had lived together peacefully for generations now. She was evacuating human children from schools where they had learned alongside alien classmates. The alien children did not understand why their human friends were leaving. Some of them cried as the transport ships departed. Others waved goodbye from spaceport windows, not knowing they might never see humans again. As the weeks passed, the scale of the human withdrawal became clear to everyone in the galaxy. Entire star systems that had been safe for centuries suddenly found themselves defenseless. Trade routes that had been protected by human patrols became hunting grounds for pirates. Manufacturing centers that had produced goods for dozens of worlds went silent as human engineers departed. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions, trying to figure out how to replace the humans they had just voted to restrict, but no other species had the combination of skills, adaptability, and determination that made humans so valuable. Some aliens were good at fighting, but terrible at engineering. Others were brilliant scientists, but poor soldiers. None of them could do everything that humans did. The galaxy had become dependent on human abilities without realizing it. Until now, Captain Kim Min-soo took one last look at the vegan star system as his fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. The beautiful blue worlds looked peaceful and serene, but he knew that within days they would be burning under Crimson Fleet attacks. The vegans had made their choice. Now they would live with the consequences. His ships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying the last human defenders away from worlds that had rejected them. Behind them, the galaxy began to realize just how much they had lost. Dr. Han Ji-woo sat in the Deep Space Command Center on Earth, watching the disaster unfold across the galaxy through dozens of monitoring screens. 6 months had passed since the last human soldiers left alien space, and now the first major crisis was tearing apart everything that humans had spent centuries protecting. The Razorclaw Horde had launched their massive invasion exactly as human intelligence had predicted. 3,000 savage reptilian warships had swept across the spiral arm territories like a storm of claws and fire. The defending alien species were crumbling faster than anyone had imagined possible. Dr. Han had once served as a medical officer with the Galactic Emergency Response Team. She had treated wounded soldiers from dozens of different species during countless border conflicts. She had seen how alien armies fought, and she knew their weaknesses better than most. The aliens were simply not prepared for war without human support. Analyst Park Soo-bin turned from her communication station with another grim report. The Aquarian Federation was requesting immediate military assistance. They were offering to restore full human membership in the Galactic Council and give Earth voting rights on all major decisions, but their beautiful underwater cities were already under attack by Razorclaw amphibious assault forces. Admiral Jung-woo Jin, the grizzled veteran who now commanded Earth Defense Forces, did not even look up from his tactical displays. His weathered face showed no emotion as he gave his response. It was too late for negotiations. The aliens had made their choice when they voted to restrict human freedom. Now they had to face the consequences alone. The Razorclaw advance seemed completely unstoppable. World after world fell to their brutal conquest methods. The reptilian warriors did not just defeat their enemies, they completely destroyed everything that represented civilization. Libraries were burned to ash, museums were looted, and their treasures melted down into raw materials. The Valkyrie had always been proud of their advanced shield technology. Their crystalline cities were supposed to be impregnable fortresses that could withstand any attack, but the Razorclaws simply landed their troops outside the shield perimeters and waited. The Valkyrie could not stay inside their shields forever, and when they came out to fight, the savage reptilians tore them apart with primitive but effective weapons. Captain Sen Lejin commanded Earth Border Patrol and intercepted hundreds of refugee ships fleeing the chaos. Each vessel carried the same terrifying story: civilized species were being slaughtered by enemies they had forgotten existed during the long peace that human protection had provided. The HiveMind had always claimed that their perfect coordination and communication networks made them unbeatable in battle. Thousands of insectoid warriors could act as one body, following orders instantly without question. But the Razorclaws had learned to jam HiveMind communications using simple electromagnetic pulse weapons. When the insects could not coordinate with each other, they became just another swarm of confused creatures. Meanwhile, other threats were emerging. From the shadows, the Void Hunters had been contained in the outer darkness for generations by human patrol fleets. Now they sensed weakness across the galaxy and began their own campaign of terror. Their ships appeared without warning, destroyed everything they found, and disappeared back into the void before anyone could respond. Pirate fleets that had been suppressed for decades suddenly found rich, undefended targets everywhere. Trade routes that had been secure for centuries became death traps filled with raiders who knew that no human rescue ships would come to help merchant vessels that had carried goods between worlds for generations were being captured and their crews sold into slavery. The Ethereal Collective had always believed that their telepathic powers made them superior to other species. They could read minds, control thoughts, and coordinate their actions through pure mental connection, but telepathy was useless against enemies who were too savage and primitive to be mentally influenced. The Void Hunters attacked with such chaotic fury that even reading their minds provided no useful information. Commander Shinbyo Ra patrolled the outer edges of human space, watching as streams of desperate refugees approached Earth borders. Every day brought new requests for sanctuary from species that had once voted to limit human expansion. Now they were begging for any safe place to hide from the chaos consuming their worlds. The refugee ships carried heartbreaking stories. The crystal entities described how their harmonic cities had been shattered by sonic weapons. The Ethereal Collective survivors spoke of watching their floating islands crash into oceans as Void Hunter raiders cut their support systems. The few remaining Aquarians told of underwater cities being poisoned by chemical weapons that turned their seas into toxic wastelands. Captain Nam Yu monitored communications from Luna Base and watched as the Galactic Council made increasingly desperate attempts to convince humanity to return. They offered complete control over galactic military forces they promised to make Earth the capital world of the entire galaxy. They even offered tribute payments and territorial concessions that would have made humanity the dominant power in known space, but President Kim the Jin and the Earth government were focused on different priorities. For the first time in centuries, humanity could develop without the burden of protecting ungrateful aliens. Resources that had once gone toward defending distant worlds were now being invested in human colonies and research. Without galactic responsibilities, humanity was advancing faster than ever before. New technologies were being developed. Human populations were growing on dozens of worlds that had been considered too dangerous or difficult for other species. Scientists were making discoveries that had been impossible when their time was divided between human needs and alien problems. General Lin Jiangsu presented his analysis to the Earth Defense Council. The galactic situation was approaching total collapse within 18 months. The civilized species controlled less than 40% of their original territory and were losing ground every day. The Razorclaw Horde and Void Hunters were growing stronger with each victory, incorporating conquered technology and enslaved populations into their forces. The irony was obvious to everyone watching from Earth. The galaxy that had tried to chain humanity because they were too successful was now being destroyed, because those same qualities were no longer available to protect civilization. The aliens had wanted human strength without human independence, human service without human equality. Dr. Hanji Wu received another desperate message from her former colleagues in the Galactic Emergency Response Team. They were reporting casualty numbers that seemed impossible to believe. Billions of civilians were dead or missing. Entire species were facing extinction. Some worlds had been completely abandoned by their populations. The message included personal pleas from alien doctors and nurses who had worked alongside Diahan for years. They begged her to return and help treat the endless waves of wounded refugees, but her orders from Earth were clear. No human medical personnel would be deployed outside human space. As the reports continued streaming and the magnitude of the disaster became clear, the galaxy was not just losing a war, it was losing the ability to function as a civilization. The trade networks were broken, the communication systems were failing. The basic infrastructure that connected thousands of worlds was falling apart without human maintenance, Captain. Park Gil-soo monitored deep space sensors and detected signs that the enemy forces were preparing for their next phase. The Razorclaw Horde and Void Hunters had formed an alliance, combining their strengths into something even more dangerous. Working together, they could finish off the remaining civilized species. Completely intelligence reports suggested that the enemy alliance was now planning something that chilled human observers. They were targeting Earth itself. The savage forces had decided that humanity was the only remaining threat to their dominance of the galaxy. If they could destroy or conquer Earth, then nothing would be left to stop their complete victory. The age of human isolation was ending, whether Earth wanted it to end or not. The war was coming to human space, and humanity would have to decide whether to stand alone or fight for the galaxy that had rejected them. But one thing was becoming very clear: the species that had voted to restrict human power were learning too late that without human protection they had no power at all. Engineer Oh Seung-ho was working on Earth new orbital defense platforms when the encrypted message arrived. The communication came from deep space. Using old emergency frequencies that had not been active for over a year, the message was from his former colleague, a crystalline entity named Shard of Ancient Wisdom. Oh Seung-ho remembered working with Shard during the construction of the galaxy's most advanced shield systems. They had spent months together designing the harmonic matrices that protected dozens of worlds from asteroid impacts and enemy attacks. The crystalline entity had been like a mentor, teaching him how to work with living crystal technology. The translated message was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Human friend Oh Seung-ho, the crystal worlds are dying. The Void Hunters have learned to disrupt our harmonic matrices. Our people fracture into madness when our crystals break. We humbly request your knowledge to save our children. Oh Seung-ho stared at the message. For a long time he had seen the intelligence reports about what was happening to the crystal worlds. The Void Hunters were using sonic weapons to shatter the living crystals that formed the basis of crystalline civilization. When their crystals broke, the crystalline entities lost their connection to each other and went insane from the isolation. Similar messages were arriving at Earth every day. Species that had voted to restrict human rights were now begging for human help. The proud ethereal collective who had claimed humans were mentally inferior sent desperate pleas for tactical assistance. Their psychic powers were useless against enemies who could not be mentally controlled. Captain Nam Dae-yoon monitored the flood of communications from Luna Base. The desperation in the alien messages was growing stronger each day. The Galactic Council was making offers that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. They were promising to make Earth the capital of the galaxy with complete administrative control over all member worlds. The Aquarian Federation offered to give humanity unlimited access to their biotechnology and underwater cities. The Valkyrie promised to share their most advanced shield designs. The insectoid hive mind offered to serve as workers for human expansion projects. Each species was trying to trade their most valuable assets for human protection. President Kim The-jin studied the offers carefully in her office overlooking the rebuilt cities of Earth outside her windows. Human civilization was thriving like never before. Without the burden of protecting alien worlds, humanity had been able to focus on their own development. New technologies were being invented every month. Human colonies were spreading to worlds that had been considered impossible to settle. The economic reports were remarkable. Human productivity had increased by 300% since withdrawing from galactic affairs. The resources that had once gone toward maintaining alien infrastructure were now being used to build human cities, human schools, human research facilities. General Lim Jong-soo activated the holographic display showing the current galactic situation. The map was a nightmare of red zones representing conquered territory. The Razorclaw Horde now controlled 30% of former Council space. The Void Hunters had claimed another 20%. Various pirate coalitions and minor aggressive species were carving up the remaining territory. The civilized species were down to less than 30% of their original space, and that percentage was shrinking every day. Some species had been reduced to single worlds or small fleets of refugee ships. The mighty galactic civilization that had existed for thousands of years was collapsing within months. Dr. Song Hyojin, head of the Refugee Integration Program, presented her report to the Global Assembly. The refugee camps on Luna and Mars were overflowing with displaced beings from across the galaxy. Over 200 different species were now seeking sanctuary in human space. The refugees were offering everything they had left in exchange for protection. Advanced technologies that had been closely guarded secrets for centuries were being freely shared. Territorial claims to entire star systems were being signed over to humanity. Some species were even offering to become client states, serving human interests in exchange for survival. Debates in the Global Assembly grew heated every day. The isolationist faction led by Senator Park Gil-soo argued that humanity owed nothing to the species that had betrayed them. He pointed out that these same aliens had voted to restrict human breeding and limit human expansion. Just 2 years ago, Senator Park stood at the podium with conviction burning in his eyes. He reminded the assembly of all the human soldiers who had died protecting alien worlds. He spoke of the human families who had been forced to leave their homes on alien planets. He described the years of discrimination and suspicion that humans had faced. Despite their sacrifices, his message was simple: let the aliens face the consequences of their choices. They had wanted to control humanity when humans were useful. Now they could face their enemies without human help. It was time for humanity to look after their own interests instead of constantly helping ungrateful neighbors. But the interventionist faction led by Admiral Choi Min-young saw a different opportunity. She argued that the galaxy was now available to humanity, not through conquest but through protection. Every species that humanity saved would become a grateful ally. The new galactic order could be built with humanity at its rightful center. Admiral Choi presented her own vision to the assembly. She described a future where human values of freedom and equality would spread across the galaxy instead of the corrupt council system that had betrayed humanity. There could be a new federation based on merit and mutual respect. The military situation was becoming more urgent every day. Captain Yu Dong-hyun commanded the Deep Space Monitoring Station at Pluto, and his sensors were detecting disturbing signs. Enemy scout fleets had been spotted in the outer solar system. The Razorclaw Void Hunter Alliance was preparing for something big. Intelligence analysts were working around the clock to understand the enemy plans. The Alliance had grown much stronger by incorporating conquered technology and enslaved populations into their forces. Some of the enslaved species were being forced to build new weapons and ships for their captors. The most disturbing reports came from the few surviving Aquarian intelligence operatives. The enemy alliance was planning a massive assault on Earth itself. They had decided that humanity was the only remaining threat to their complete dominance of the galaxy. If they could destroy or conquer Earth, then nothing would stand in their way. Captain Lee So-young now served as head of strategic planning, and her analysis was grim. The enemy had over 5,000 ships under their combined command. They had battle-tested troops from dozens of conquered worlds. They had weapons that combined the technology of multiple species into devastating new designs, but the enemy also had weaknesses that human tacticians were quick to identify. The alliance was held together by fear and mutual benefit rather than true cooperation. The Razorclaw Horde and Void Hunters had very different fighting styles and goals. Their combined fleets were powerful but not well coordinated. Dr. Hang Ji-woo received another personal message from alien colleagues begging for her help. The latest reports from the war zones described medical situations that were almost beyond comprehension. Entire hospitals had been destroyed. Alien doctors were trying to treat injuries they had never seen before. Diseases were spreading through refugee populations without human medical expertise to contain them. The message included recordings from alien medical facilities where doctors were breaking down from exhaustion and despair. They were watching patients die from injuries that human doctors could have easily treated. They were facing epidemics that human medical knowledge could have prevented. As the political debates continued on Earth, the military was quietly preparing for the inevitable. Captain Kim Tae-won had been placed in charge of upgrading Earth defenses. The orbital platforms were being expanded. New weapon systems were being installed. Human colonies throughout the solar system were being fortified. The Question was no longer whether humanity would be forced back into galactic affairs. The war was coming to Earth whether humans wanted it or not. The real question was whether humanity would emerge from the coming battle as the galaxy savior or its new master, the species that had once voted to limit humanity's role in galactic affairs. We're about to learn what it meant to live in a galaxy without human protection, and humanity was about to discover whether they truly wanted the responsibility of leading a civilization that had betrayed them. Commander Shin Bio-ra received the distress signal while patrolling the outer edge of the Sol system. Her small fleet of human vessels watched in horror as the unthinkable finally happened. The fortress world of Aegis Prime, the last major stronghold of the Galactic Council, had fallen to a massive combined assault. The Razorclaw Horde and Void Hunters had done something that military analysts had thought impossible. They had formed a true alliance, combining their savage efficiency with coordinated strategy. Together, they had broken through defenses that had protected the Council core worlds for over 1,000 years. Lieutenant Beak Suho turned from his tactical station with urgent news streams of refugee ships were fleeing toward Earth space, carrying the last survivors of civilizations that had once ruled the galaxy. The ships were packed beyond capacity with beings who had lost everything they had ever known. Among the refugee fleet were transponders from the Aquarian royal family. The entire government of the Aquarian Federation was crammed into a handful of damaged ships. Their beautiful underwater homeworld had been poisoned by chemical weapons that turned their crystal-clear seas into toxic wastelands. Commander Shin felt a complex mix of emotions as she watched the Aquarian ships approach Earth borders. The Aquarians had been among humanity's closest allies for generations. Human children had learned to swim in Aquarian schools. Aquarian youth had studied human art and music in Earth universities, but when the Galactic Council voted on the genetic purity protocols, the Aquarians had supported the restrictions. They had claimed that human expansion was too aggressive and needed to be controlled. They had thrown away decades of friendship because they were afraid of human success now. Their homeworld was destroyed, their government was in exile, and their people were dying in overcrowded refugee ships. The price of their betrayal had been higher than anyone could have imagined. Back on Earth, the refugee crisis was creating intense political debates. Massive camps had been established on Luna, Mars, and several asteroids to house the displaced beings, but resources were stretching dangerously thin. More importantly, humanity faced a choice that would define their future for centuries. Dr. Song Hyo-jin presented her latest report to the Global Assembly. The refugee population had grown to over 50 million beings, representing more than 300 different species. They were offering humanity everything they had left in exchange for protection. Advanced technologies that had been developed over thousands of years, or being freely shared. Territorial claims to entire sectors of space were being signed over to human control. Some species were even offering to serve as permanent client states under human leadership. The political debates grew more heated every day. The isolationist faction had gained support as more humans learned about the scale of the galactic collapse. Senator Park Gil-soo argued passionately that humanity had already sacrificed enough for ungrateful aliens. He stood before the packed assembly hall and reminded everyone of the human costs: the soldiers who had died protecting alien worlds, the families who had been forced to abandon their homes, the years of discrimination and suspicion that humans had faced despite their constant service. Senator Park's voice carried anger and pain as he described the betrayal. Humanity had been loyal allies for centuries. They had shared their technology, protected alien worlds with their lives, and treated other species as equals. But when the aliens had the chance to support human rights, they had chosen fear over friendship. His message was clear: humanity owed nothing to the species that had betrayed them. Let them face the consequences of their choices alone. It was time for humans to focus on their own civilization instead of constantly rescuing ungrateful neighbors. But the interventionist faction led by Admiral Choi Min-young was growing stronger as well. She saw the refugee crisis as the greatest opportunity in human history. The galaxy was essentially offering itself to humanity on a silver platter. Admiral Choi presented a compelling vision to the assembly. She described a future where human values would spread across the galaxy, bringing freedom, equality, and justice to worlds that had never known such concepts instead of the corrupt council system there. Could be a new federation based on merit rather than politics. She pointed out that many of the refugee species had never actually voted against humanity. The genetic purity protocols had been pushed through by a few powerful species while smaller civilizations had been forced to go along. The current crisis was a chance to build something better than what had existed before. The military situation was becoming desperate. Captain Yu Donghai in deep space sensors detected massive enemy fleet movements. The Razorclaw Void Hunter Alliance was preparing for their final assault on human space. Intelligence estimates suggested they had over 8,000 ships under their combined command. Enemy strategy was becoming clear. They intended to destroy Earth and end the last hope of organized resistance in the galaxy. With humanity eliminated, there would be nothing left to stop their complete conquest of known space. General Kim Tae-won coordinated Earth defenses from the underground command center beneath New Geneva. His analysis was sobering. Even with all the improvements to human military technology, the approaching enemy fleet was larger than anything humanity had ever faced, but the refugees were offering something that could change the balance. Captain Moon Sayuri had been working with Aquarian biotechnology experts to develop new ship designs. The combination of human engineering with alien science was producing vessels more powerful than either species could build alone. VRO Sungho was collaborating with surviving crystalline entities to create hybrid shield systems that used both human energy technology and living crystal matrices. The results were defensive systems far superior to anything that had existed before. The ethereal collective survivors were sharing their telepathic coordination abilities with human commanders. The combination of human tactical thinking with alien mental communication was creating new forms of battlefield coordination. President Kim The-jin faced the most difficult decision in human history. The enemy alliance would attack whether humanity helped the refugees or not. Earth would be forced to fight for survival regardless of political choices. The question was whether humanity would face that battle alone or with allies. The moral arguments were complex. The refugee species had not all betrayed humanity. Many had been forced to vote for the genetic purity protocols by more powerful neighbors. Some had tried to abstain or vote against the restrictions but had been overruled. Captain Park Gil-soo monitored the outer system sensors and reported disturbing news. The enemy advanced scouts were already entering the asteroid belt. The main fleet would arrive within weeks. The time for debate was running out in the refugee camps. Desperate aliens were volunteering for dangerous missions. Aquarian engineers were working 20-hour days to help upgrade human ships. Crystalline entities were sharing their most closely guarded secrets. Ethereal collective members were teaching human pilots how to use telepathic coordination. BR Han Ji-woo established emergency medical facilities that combined human techniques with alien healing methods. The hybrid hospitals were more effective than anything that had existed before, treating injuries and diseases from dozens of different species. The transformation was remarkable. Species that had been suspicious of each other for centuries were working together under human leadership. The crisis was bringing out the best in both humanity and their former enemies, but the political debate continued raging in the assembly. Senator Park Gil-soo argued that helping the refugees was a trap that would drag humanity back into galactic responsibilities that had already proven costly and thankless. Admiral Choi Min-young countered that humanity had a chance to build something better than the corrupt council system. The new alliance could be based on human principles of freedom and merit rather than the politics and prejudice that had dominated galactic affairs. As the enemy fleet approached Earth, the choice became clear. Humanity could stand alone and probably lose, or they could lead a desperate alliance of survivors and possibly win, but either way the age of human isolation was ending. The galaxy that had rejected humanity was burning, and Earth had to decide whether to let it burn or fight to save what remained. The species that had voted to restrict human power were about to learn whether humanity was capable of forgiveness. The final battle was coming, and it would determine not just who survived, but what kind of civilization would emerge from the ashes of the old galaxy. Admiral Yang Men-jun stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought. Terra Pride watching as the largest enemy fleet in galactic history approached. Mars, the Razorclaw Void Hunter Alliance had brought 8,000 ships carrying the combined might of dozens of conquered species. Their goal was simple: destroy Earth and end human resistance forever. Around the red planet, humanity had assembled their own fleet, but it looked impossibly small compared to the approaching enemy. Yang Minjun commanded 400 human vessels supported by whatever ships the refugee species had managed to save from their destroyed worlds. Something had changed during the months of preparation. The refugee species were no longer just asking for human protection. They had become true partners in the fight for survival. Aquarian bioships had merged with human engineering, creating hybrid vessels more powerful than either species could build alone. Captain Moon Se-ri commanded the left flank. From her hybrid carrier New Soul, the ship combined human tactical systems with Aquarian biotechnology, creating a vessel that could adapt and evolve during battle. Her fighter squadrons were equipped with weapons that used both human engineering and alien innovations. The enemy fleet was truly massive. Razorclaw assault ships bristled with weapons designed for close combat, while Void Hunter vessels moved like shadows through space using stealth technology that made them nearly invisible. The Alliance had incorporated conquered technology from dozens of species into their forces, but humanity was not the same species that had withdrawn from the galaxy 2 years ago. The isolation had allowed humans to develop new technologies and tactics. The pressure of the refugee crisis had forced rapid innovation. The combination of human creativity with alien knowledge had produced military capabilities that surpassed anything in galactic history. Admiral Yang broadcast to the entire combined fleet, his voice carrying to human ships and alien vessels alike: today we do not just defend Earth, we decide the future of galactic civilization. The enemy believes that might makes right. We will show them that cooperation makes us stronger. The battle began when Void Hunter stealth ships attempted to infiltrate the outer defensive perimeter. Captain Kim Tae-won commanded the detection grid using a combination of human sensors and ethereal collective telepathic abilities. The psychic aliens could sense the emotional patterns of enemy crews even through stealth fields. The first enemy ships to die were Void Hunter raiders who thought they were invisible. Human ethereal teams tracked them through space and destroyed them with coordinated strikes. The enemy had never faced defenders who could combine technology with psychic. Abolitious Razorka assault ships charged forward expecting to overwhelm human defenses with savage fury, but they encountered something completely unexpected. Crystalline entity shield matrices powered by human energy systems created defensive barriers that could absorb and redirect enemy fire. The shields did not just block attacks, they turned enemy weapons against each other. Razorclaw energy blasts were captured by the crystal matrices and fired back at other enemy ships. The savage reptilians found themselves destroying their own allies with redirected fire. Captain Choi Haijin commanded a squadron of hybrid fighters that combined human piloting skills with Aquarian biological systems. The ships could literally heal themselves during battle, regrowing damaged components and adapting to enemy tactics. Her pilots were learning to fight like living organisms rather than machines. The battle raged across the inner solar system for 6 hours. Enemy ships that had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves outmaneuvered by defenders who fought with perfect coordination. Human tactical doctrine had been enhanced by alien telepathic communication, creating battlefield awareness that no single species could achieve. General Lim Jong-soo coordinated the defense from Luna Base, using a command system that combined human strategic thinking with the collective intelligence of the hive mind survivors. The insectoid aliens provided processing power that allowed human commanders to track thousands of enemy ships simultaneously. The turning point came when the enemy flagship Skullcrusher led a massive assault on Terra Pride. The Razorclaw command ship was a monster covered in weapons and armor that had been taken from conquered worlds, but it faced something it had never encountered before: a ship crewed by beings from dozens of species working together. The combined crew of Terra Pride included human gunners, Aquarian engineers, crystalline entity shield operators, and ethereal collective coordinators working as one. The ship fought like a living thing, adapting to enemy attacks and striking back with devastating Precision when Skullcrusher finally exploded under concentrated fire from Terra. Pride, the psychological impact on the enemy was immediate. The Razorclaw Void Hunter Alliance had been held together by fear and the promise of easy victory. Now they faced defenders who were clearly superior. The remaining enemy forces began a chaotic retreat, but Admiral Yang was not finished. All units pursue and destroy, he ordered. We end this threat permanently. The combined fleet followed the fleeing enemies across the solar system, hunting down every ship that had dared to attack Earth. The pursuit lasted 3 months as human-led fleets systematically hunted down the remnants of the enemy alliance. Captain Park Gilsu commanded one of the pursuit squadrons that followed fleeing Razorclaws back to their home systems. What they found there shocked even experienced human officers. The Razorclaw worlds